The moment I tossed my store keys through the security gate and walked away from Horizon Electronics on the busiest shopping day of the year, I knew my alcoholic, divorce-crazed manager would face consequences that would destroy both his career and the store he'd been systematically mismanaging for months. What he didn't know was that I'd been documenting his labor law violations, recording his breakdowns, and preparing for exactly this kind of dramatic exit that would cost the company thousands in lost revenue and regulatory fines. My name is Gregor Martinez, 40 years old, and until that Black Friday morning, I was the unofficial assistant manager of Horizon Electronics in Westfield Shopping Center. For 6 months, I'd watched my boss, Derek, spiral into alcoholism and depression while forcing me to work illegal shifts, denying me the promotion I'd been promised, and turning our store into a workplace safety nightmare that violated every retail management protocol in existence. What Derek couldn't have anticipated was that I'd been building a case against him while planning the perfect revenge that would expose his incompetence on the most critical sales day of the year. The only question remaining was whether corporate would fire him before or after calculating how much money his breakdown had cost them. Some managers destroy themselves. Others need help finishing the job. The nightmare began 6 months earlier when I accepted what I thought was a dream job opportunity. After 12 years managing electronics departments for various retailers, I'd been recruited by Horizon Electronics to serve as assistant manager at their flagship store in one of the region's most successful shopping malls. The position offered a $15,000 salary increase, management experience with a growing company, and the promise of rapid advancement to store manager within 18 months. Derek Williams had interviewed me personally, presenting himself as a seasoned retail professional who understood both customer service and team leadership. He was 45 years old, had been with Horizon for 8 years, and spoke convincingly about building a dynamic team that could compete with the big box stores that dominated electronics retail. During our conversation, he emphasized the importance of reliability, initiative, and shared responsibility in successful store management. "Gregor, I'm looking for someone who can be my partner in running this operation," he'd said during my final interview. "The assistant manager position requires someone who can handle customer issues, manage inventory, and supervise staff when I'm not available. It's a real leadership role with real responsibility." I was impressed by his vision and excited about the opportunity to advance my career with a company that seemed to value experienced management. The salary was competitive, the benefits were solid, and the chance to help build a successful electronics store in a prime retail location felt like exactly the kind of challenge I was ready to embrace. My first warning sign should have been Derek's appearance on my first day of work. I arrived Monday morning at 9 a.m. for what was supposed to be my orientation and introduction to the management systems. But Derek looked like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes were bloodshot, and his hands were shaking slightly as he fumbled with the store keys. When I asked if everything was okay, he muttered something about personal issues and temporary stress that would resolve themselves soon. That's when he delivered the news that would define the next 6 months of my professional life. "Gregor, there's been a slight change in the timeline for your promotion," he said, avoiding eye contact while we walked through the empty store. "Corporate has implemented a new policy requiring a probationary period for all management positions. You'll be working as a senior sales associate for the first few months while we evaluate your performance and fit with company culture." "How long is the probationary period?" I asked, already sensing that something wasn't right about this sudden policy change. "Typically 3 months, but it can be extended if necessary. The important thing is proving that you can handle the responsibilities before we make it official." I should have questioned the discrepancy between what I'd been promised during the interview process and what was happening on my first day. I should have insisted on seeing this new corporate policy in writing. I should have recognized the signs of someone who was making desperate decisions to cover personal problems. Instead, I accepted Derek's explanation and focused on learning the job, assuming that 3 months would pass quickly and that my promotion would be processed as soon as I demonstrated competence. I had no way of knowing that Derek's personal issues involved a messy divorce, escalating alcohol abuse, and increasingly erratic behavior that would make normal business operations impossible. The problems became apparent during my second week when Derek started scheduling me for shifts that violated both state labor laws and company policies. Retail employees in our state are required to take a 30-minute break for any shift longer than 6 hours, and assistant managers are specifically prohibited from working alone in stores that carry high-value electronics merchandise. But Derek was scheduling me for 10-hour shifts with no breaks and no other staff members, leaving me to handle customer service, inventory management, and security responsibilities that should have been shared among multiple employees. "Derek, I can't legally work a 10-hour shift without a break," I explained when I first noticed the scheduling violation, and company policy requires at least 2 people in the store when we're carrying laptops and high-end audio equipment. "It's temporary," he replied, his voice carrying the defensive tone I was beginning to recognize as his standard response to criticism. "We're short-staffed right now, and I need someone reliable to cover the difficult shifts. Once we hire more people, the schedule will normalize." But we never hired more people, the schedule never normalized, and Derek's behavior became increasingly concerning as the weeks passed. I started noticing that Derek would disappear for hours during his scheduled shifts, leaving me to manage the store alone while he dealt with what he called administrative responsibilities. Sometimes I could hear him on the phone in the storage room, having heated conversations that were clearly personal rather than business-related. Other times I would find him sitting in his office with his head in his hands, looking like he was on the verge of tears. The breaking point came during my 3rd month when I realized that Derek's administrative responsibilities often involved drinking alcohol in the storage room during business hours. I'd been looking for inventory paperwork one afternoon when I noticed the smell of liquor coming from the area where Derek had been conducting business calls. A quick investigation revealed an empty whiskey bottle hidden behind boxes of printer cartridges, along with several beer cans that Derek had apparently consumed during his shift. The evidence suggested that his erratic behavior wasn't just about divorce stress. It was about substance abuse that was interfering with his ability to manage the store safely. That's when I started documenting everything. I began keeping detailed records of Derek's schedule violations, his disappearances during work hours, and the evidence of drinking on company property. I photographed the empty bottles and cans, recorded dates and times when he was unavailable during business hours, and documented every instance when I was forced to work alone in violation of company security policies. But I also started researching my legal rights as an employee who'd been promised a specific position and salary, but was being denied both without justification. The more I learned, the angrier I became. Derek had essentially committed fraud during my hiring process by promising a position he apparently had no authority to grant, then created an illegal work environment that violated multiple state labor laws. He was paying me $15,000 less than we'd agreed upon while expecting me to perform the exact duties of an assistant manager, including handling customer complaints, managing inventory, and supervising other employees when they were scheduled. Meanwhile, the other staff members had been told that I was the assistant manager and routinely came to me with questions about scheduling, store policies, and customer service issues. Derek had created a situation where I had all the responsibilities of management, but none of the authority, compensation, or legal protections that should have accompanied the position. The situation reached a crisis point in October when Derek's drinking and personal problems began affecting our relationship with the shopping mall management. I was at home on a Wednesday evening when I received a call from Sharon Murphy, the assistant manager of Westfield Shopping Center, asking why Horizon Electronics wasn't open during our contracted business hours. "Mr. Martinez, according to our tenant agreement, your store should be open until 9 p.m. on weekdays," she said, her tone professional but clearly annoyed. "It's currently 7:30 and your security gate is down with no indication of when you'll reopen." "I'm not scheduled to work tonight," I explained, confused about why she was calling me instead of Derek. "You should contact Derek Williams, the store manager. He's responsible for ensuring we meet our operating hours." We tried calling Mr. Williams, but his phone numbers aren't working. According to our emergency contact list, you're listed as the assistant manager and secondary contact for the store. That's when I realized Derek had been listing me as assistant manager on official documents while denying me the actual position, salary, and authority that should have accompanied the title. He was using my name and contact information to meet corporate and mall requirements while keeping me in a legal and financial limbo that benefited no one except his own desperate attempts to maintain the appearance of competent management. I drove to the mall immediately and used my key to open the store, staying until 9 p.m. to meet our tenant obligations. But I also started planning my exit strategy, because the situation had clearly become unsustainable and potentially dangerous for everyone involved. The final straw came 2 weeks later when my coworker Jennifer pulled me aside with information that confirmed my worst suspicions about Derek's intentions. "Gregor, I need to tell you something," she said during our break, her voice hushed and worried. "Derek has been asking me questions about your performance, looking for reasons to criticize your work. Yesterday, he told me he was planning to fire you for losing your keys, even though you found them and brought them in the next day. When is he planning to do this? Saturday? He's scheduled you to work alone all day, which is illegal anyway, and he's planning to let you finish the shift and then fire you at closing time. He thinks it's clever because you won't be able to argue or cause a scene with customers around." The cowardice and calculation of Derek's plan was infuriating, but it was also an opportunity. If Derek wanted to fire me for a minor incident while forcing me to work an illegal shift on one of the busiest shopping days of the year, I could turn his own incompetence against him in a way that would expose everything I'd been documenting for months. That's when I decided to give Derek exactly the kind of day he deserved. Saturday morning arrived gray and cold, with the kind of pre-holiday shopping energy that made retail workers either excited about sales commissions or terrified about customer crowds. I arrived at Horizon Electronics at my usual time, used my key to enter the store, and began my normal opening routine, disabling the security system, turning on the lights, starting up the computer terminals, and checking the overnight messages. But instead of preparing for a day of customer service, I was preparing for a dramatic exit that would teach Derek the difference between management and leadership. I spent 30 minutes methodically cleaning out my personal belongings from the storage areas, employee break room, and the small locker where I kept my extra uniform shirts. I removed every item that belonged to me personally, along with all the documentation I'd been collecting about Derek's labor law violations and substance abuse issues. The files went into my car, safely stored for future reference if needed. Then I completed my opening duties with the kind of meticulous attention to detail that Derek had never demonstrated. I turned on all the display monitors, arranged the promotional materials exactly according to corporate standards, and ensured that every system was functioning properly for whoever would eventually have to manage the store in my absence. Finally, I walked to the front of the store, removed my key from my keychain, and threw it through the security gate that separated the store interior from the mall corridor. The metal key hit the tile floor with a sharp clink that echoed through the empty store like a gunshot. Then I pulled down the security gate, turned my back on Horizon Electronics, and walked toward the mall exit without looking back. My cell phone started ringing before I reached the parking lot. I drove to Margarita's Mexican Grill, a restaurant about 10 minutes from the mall where my friends Laura and Christina were waiting for the lunch celebration we'd planned. They'd been listening to me complain about Derek's mismanagement for months, and they were as excited as I was to see how his day would unfold without an assistant manager to cover his mistakes. "Did you really just abandon the store on Black Friday?" Laura asked as I slid into the booth where they'd already ordered a pitcher of margaritas. "I didn't abandon anything," I replied, feeling lighter than I had in months. "I returned company property and terminated my employment with appropriate notice." "By throwing your key through the gate?" "Derek wanted to fire me today anyway. I just saved him the trouble while ensuring he'd face the consequences of his own management decisions." We spent the next 3 hours enjoying excellent Mexican food and strong drinks, while my phone rang constantly with calls from the mall office, Horizon corporate headquarters, and Derek's various phone numbers. Every time it rang, we would toast to another step in Derek's professional downfall, because we all knew that failing to open on Black Friday would trigger investigations, fines, and questions that Derek wasn't prepared to answer. By 4 p.m., I'd received 17 missed calls and 6 voicemails from increasingly frantic managers trying to understand why their flagship store was closed on the most important shopping day of the year. The voicemails ranged from confused, "Gregor, the mall says your store isn't open, can you call back?" to angry, "This is unacceptable, call immediately," to desperate, "Please call back, we need to resolve this situation." I didn't return any of the calls. Derek had made his choice when he decided to fire me for a minor incident while forcing me to work illegally. Now he could live with the consequences of running a store without the assistant manager he'd been exploiting for months. The full scope of the chaos became clear over the following weeks, as news of Derek's firing spread through the retail community. Regional manager Patricia Collins called me 3 weeks after my dramatic exit, her tone a mixture of frustration and curiosity about what had happened at the store. "Gregor, I need to understand why you left without notice on Black Friday," she said, after explaining that Derek had been terminated for multiple policy violations. "The store remained closed for the entire day. We lost approximately $50,000 in sales, and the mall imposed penalty fees for violating our tenant agreement. I was scheduled to work alone for 10 hours without breaks, which violates state labor law," I explained. "Derek was planning to fire me at the end of that illegal shift, so I saved everyone the trouble by resigning immediately." "You were scheduled to work alone?" "That's against company policy for stores carrying high-value electronics." "Derek had been scheduling me illegally for months. I have documentation of the labor law violations, evidence of his drinking during work hours, and records showing that he was listing me as assistant manager on official documents while denying me the actual position and salary." The silence on Patricia's line lasted so long I thought we'd been disconnected. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. "Gregor, would you be willing to meet with our Human Resources Department to discuss these issues? We're conducting a full investigation of the store's operations under Derek's management." "I'd be happy to share my documentation with appropriate investigators," I replied, "but I should mention that I've already accepted a position as assistant manager at Electronics World, where I'm earning the salary I was originally promised, and working under managers who understand both labor law and professional behavior. The human resources investigation confirmed everything I'd documented during my 6 months with Derek. He'd been systematically violating company policies, state labor laws, and basic management principles while using alcohol to cope with personal problems that were interfering with his professional responsibilities. The investigation also revealed that he'd been falsifying scheduling records to hide the extent of his violations and had used company funds for personal expenses during his divorce proceedings. Derek was not only fired but also faced criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud. His actions had cost Horizon Electronics over $75,000 in lost sales, regulatory fines, and legal fees associated with the investigation. The store was eventually closed permanently after the company decided that the location's reputation had been too damaged to continue operations. But the most satisfying outcome was learning that my dramatic exit had inspired 2 other employees to come forward with their own stories of Derek's misconduct. Jennifer had been sexually harassed during late-night shifts when Derek was drinking, and Robert had been forced to work unpaid overtime to cover Derek's absences. Their complaints led to additional investigations and settlements that cost the company hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees and compensation. 6 months after my Black Friday walkout, I was promoted to store manager at Electronics World, earning more money than Derek had ever made, and managing a team of employees who respected both company policies and professional boundaries. My documentation of Derek's violations had been so thorough that it became a case study in the Human Resources Department's training program for identifying and addressing management misconduct. I still drive past the location where Horizon Electronics used to operate, now occupied by a clothing store that has no idea about the drama that once unfolded behind their walls. The empty space serves as a reminder that good management requires more than just showing up. It requires integrity, competence, and respect for the people who make retail operations successful. Derek Williams learned that lesson too late to save his career, his reputation, or his freedom. But his failure became my opportunity to demonstrate the difference between a manager who exploits employees and a leader who develops them. Some people destroy themselves through their own poor choices. Others just need someone to hold them accountable for the consequences of those choices. On Black Friday, Derek got exactly the kind of accountability he'd been avoiding for months, and I got exactly the kind of career advancement that comes from refusing to accept illegal working conditions and systematic exploitation. The key I threw through that security gate didn't just end my employment with Horizon Electronics. It opened the door to everything I'd been working toward, while Derek had been holding me back. Sometimes the most dramatic gestures are also the most practical solutions to impossible situations. Derek thought he was clever by planning to fire me after forcing me to work an illegal shift. Instead, he discovered that exploiting people has consequences, and that those consequences are especially painful when they arrive on the busiest shopping day of the year. Some lessons are expensive. Some are just long overdue.